Good evening and welcome to the 4th ILF Samanvay No Thanks Bar Conversations. As you know, each month there has been a new focus, a conversation which we as a thinking public must begin and advocate. Last month was a session on Does Art Create a People? Social Engagement as Art Practice. Today's conversation, in collaboration with Oxford University Press, is on soda politics, the language of sugar and fizz. We'll take a look at a small video.
This is a film about war, a world war. A war which in all my years as a correspondent has somehow escaped my attention. It is a war fought in more than 100 countries, regardless of ideology. In communist and capitalist countries, in Muslim, Buddhist and Christian countries. It's a war that has directly involved President Eisenhower, President Johnson, President Nixon, President Carter, Chiang Kai-shek, Mao Zedong, the Dalai Lama, Mr. Khrushchev and Father Christmas. Of course, claims by both sides in wartime are extravagant, but there is some truth in their dispatches. For example, according to one side, the entire American army has adopted its name as the very symbol of freedom and the American way. One side claims to have captured China. The other side says it has taken Russia. Indeed, no conquerors, religions or empires have spread themselves so completely across the planet as these two superpowers, with their running slogans of life, liberty and the pursuit of thirst, and we are the essence of capitalism, and we must save the world. I refer to the bittersweet war between those giants of carbonation and regurgitation, Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola.
Please watch it, it's on YouTube. Spurred by the release of Marion Nestle Soda Politics, taking on big soda and winning, this no tongues barred conversation will go beyond the direct environmental, health and lifestyle implications of making soda a habit. We need to look at the language that is used to create a sense of cool around many compromised, shallow, unethical and modern narratives. The language of sugar and fizz is sweet and intimate sounding, but unhealthy and superficial language that seems to be the voice of many contemporary enterprises that attempt to construct modernities of convenience. To discuss this, we have with us Sunita Narain, a writer, environmentalist, Padma Shri awardee, Director General of Center for Science and Environment, and the editor of the fortnightly magazine Down to Earth, a woman who enjoys wearing many hats. Welcome to the ILF Conversation series and the panel. Satya Sivaraman, a print and broadcast journalist with over 30 years of experience in South and Southeast Asia. Currently, he is working with REACT, Uppsala University, on themes ranging from finding new ways of communicating the human-microbe relationship to mobilizing popular movements around antibiotic resistance issues. Pleased to have you with us. And Sourish Bhattacharyya, a food columnist, restaurant critic, and co-founder of Delhi Gourmet Club. He decided to go solo after 28 years of active journalism, a career which saw him as the executive editor of Mail Today, editor of HT City, the daily lifestyle and entertainment section of Hindustan Times, and the national features editor of the Indian Express. Welcome, Sourish Bhattacharyya. Most of you might wonder why we do not have a beverage industry person on the panel. We are wondering too, actually. We reached out.
When the first invite came with me and the two CEOs of those companies, I said, wow, this will be fun.
I was talking to
I came.
Yes.
No, they said, one of them said to me, मरवाना है मुझे शेर के मुंह पे
शेरनी
tried offline, but only to meet with stoic silence. No one responded. Since this is a conversation, if there is any one of you amongst you in the audience who are ardent cola drinkers, please feel free to share your views. Rekha Natarajan of the OUP will share a few words.
Good evening, everybody. I was asked to say a few words on behalf of the press. I don't think we have much to say. What we have to say has already been published in this volume. And as Ashley and Sunita said, we tried our best to get a view from the other side, but the cola people chickened out of it. So we have not been able to get anyone, but we would love to hear, and we would like anybody from here who can reach out to us and give us a different perspective. We would like to entertain that also and consider maybe publishing, but we would definitely like to have the other side. With that, I would like to pass on the job to Satya to moderate today's session. Satya, over to you.
Good evening, everybody, and I accepted the job of moderating the session, though I'm not a very moderate person. I'm a bit of an extremist, so I'm wondering what I'm doing here as a moderator. I think the structure of the evening is that I start off by saying a few things and then invite Sunita and Sourish to say their view on the book and the issues that emerge from it. As I understand, the focus is on the language and the imagery and the fizz that is created around products like the colas, very successfully so. And the book itself is about, I've not read the book, it's too fat for me to sort of digest in a very short time. I had access to it. But I know broadly the contents and the work of Marion Nestle is very well known in other contexts also, in the food industry. And I just want to offer some reflections broadly. The book and its details are things that you should actually possibly learn more by actually reading the book. So I'm not going to tell you too much about the book, but the themes emerging from this book, which is about the cola industry, and she asked the question, how is a product which is just carbonated water with a lot of sugar in it so successful and so such a big industry? You know, countries after countries seek investments by these cola companies. Or even if they don't seek it, the cola companies go there anyway. And so one way or the other, they are there. Something like 100 plus countries or 180 countries, more than 100 have cola, one of the colas at least, Pepsi or Coca-Cola. And the history of Coca-Cola is interesting, that it sort of starts off with the kind of traditional beverages that were made in Latin America by the native Indians once upon a time using coca leaves. The coca leaves I go to Latin America quite often, so I have some not direct experience of chewing coca leaves, but knowledge of why it's used, and in the particular ecological terrain of living in very high altitudes where oxygen levels are much lower. It's a stimulant, basically. And you need a stimulant to sort of do the hard work of just going up and down the mountains, carrying loads and so on and so forth. But it has obviously some medicinal uses also. So it's part of traditional medicine, and at some point of time, some American in the 19th century figured out that you could, mix it with with caffeine-based products and a lot of sugar and carbonate it and sell it. Initially, it was sold as a medicine. Coca-Cola starts off as a medicine, basically, for tummy problems, for memory loss, for all kinds of things, including, I think, even for de-addiction, by the way. It was one of the things that was used for weaning away people from addiction to morphine. So it was a de-addiction agent when it started off, but over a period of time it became pure entertainment. Actually, it is entertainment, and it's the language of entertainment that surrounds the product, and it's not hard to see why the entertainment industry in general, not just the media industry as in newspapers and TV news channels, searching for cola companies to give them advertisements, but Coke is a very big player in the music industry, in the entertainment industry, art, museums. Of course, she talks about how they use corporate social responsibility projects to sort of, give their image, the sheen of that they are doing something good for society. But the fact of the matter is that this is one of the most addictive products on the planet at the moment, along with tobacco and alcohol. In fact, that's partly because though they don't use so much of the real coca leaves anymore, they use spent coca leaves now, but it still has a tiny trace of cocaine, apart from the caffeine, both addictive. But the most addictive of all, much more than this, is sugar. And sugar in the cola industries actually comes from something called high fructose corn syrup. Yeah. It's an extraction which is much cheaper than the normal table sugar that was used once upon a time. And in the statistics that I've read, basically one 300 milliliter bottle of Coca-Cola is around 10 teaspoons of sugar, equivalent of that. But it's masked. It doesn't, if you drink that much sugar in one go, you'll puke. But to mask that, they add something called phosphoric acid, which gives it a slight citrus kind of base, which cuts down the nausea part of it. Actually, minus the phosphoric acid, Coca-Cola would be undrinkable. Anyway, this is part of a long history, it's nothing new. But the interesting thing is that they're able to sell this in such large amounts and to children. Most of the advertising is aimed at children particularly. I mean, Shah Rukh Khan or Amir Khan, if they're advertising Coca-Cola, it's aimed at children, because children like cartoons. It's part of that whole way they advertise all over the world. And the point is that I want to reflect a little bit upon how did we arrive at this point. Because cola industry is a very big industry, and we are probably, this book is part of a campaign against the cola industry. But I want to reflect a little more about how addictions work in general, because we are, as biological creatures, prone to addictions, being used to routines of different kinds. Not only external but also internal. A lot of the addictions are basically about biochemistry. They basically, you ingest something and it sort of triggers off a hormone release which will tell your brain to do this or that, and it sort of seeks that high all the time. And highs can come from many pathways, many sources. Sugar is of course one of the most addictive. I think it was ranked in the top 5 addictive substances in the US by physicians just a few years ago, along with tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, and one more substance, I don't know. But sugar was there number 3 or number 4. So, and the politics of sugar is that it's also hides behind a very sordid history of colonialism and plantations and slave labor. A lot of sugar in the post discovery of America's phase. Because sugar, interestingly, the word sugar comes from the Sanskrit word sharkara, sukra in Latin, but sharkara in Sanskrit, and that's where sugar comes from. And sugar in the Indian context is traced back to around 2000 years plus. In fact, in the 3rd century AD, there were Indian experts going to China to teach them how to make jaggery. It was not refined sugar, it was jaggery at the time from sugar cane. But there's a lot of history to it, and it was considered a spice. Sugar was not used in the quantities that we are using it now. It was considered a nice spice, it was sought after, very expensive also. But a lot of the plantation labor and the whole plantation economy around sugarcane started because they wanted to cut down the price. And because sugar became popular in Europe at one point of time, much sought after. And as the prices went down, of course, it became part of everybody's cuisine. Now, the kind of statistics that I've seen is that in the last 50 years, the amount of sugar intake globally has gone up by 3 times. And the population has doubled. The population of the planet has doubled in the last 50 to 70 years. But the sugar intake, production and intake has gone up by 3 times. And obviously not everybody on the planet is taking the sugar, smaller sections. So actually the per capita jump, if you exclude those who don't have so much access to sugar, is gone up tremendously, you know. And this amount of sugar, of course, it's an addiction, but it's responsible for a whole range of health problems. The whole, not just diabetes, but linked to obesity, cardiovascular problems, you know, what we call the non-communicable diseases, a whole range of things. And the point I wanted to make is that we live in a world where human societies are manipulated according to the addictions that they are prone to. You know? When I would include, I don't use addiction necessarily in a negative term, in a negative way. I'm addicted to the sun rising in the morning every day. I can't do without it. You know, every morning it has to rise. It's also an addiction, anything regular, anything routine, which you're used to, it's nice. There are some addictions which are bad for you. So this comes in that range of things. But when you talk about addictions that are bad for you, I have to mention that we live in an age where we're addicted to the automobile, we're addicted to cities, we're addicted to electricity, we're addicted to, from the mobile to the automobile, everything is an addiction in a way, you know. So addictions are also about how do we find a balance. For example, some of the research that they've done, they show that in moderate quantities, colas are not bad for you. I mean, one of the things about the book is it's not purely in, it is in campaign mode, but very well done in terms of the research and keeping the balance of the science behind it very clear. So it's not overstating its case. But even without overstating, the case that they make out in the book is very, very alarming. But as I was saying, this is linked to the whole food industry in a larger way, because today sugar is used not only in colas, it's used in your bread, it's used in your noodles, it's used in almost all products you're putting sugar, because ever since they started this movement against addition of fat and cutting down on fat, you know, cholesterol and fat became totally off the limits for, you know, people who wanted to be healthy. Food industry around the world has been subtly adding sugar to almost every product, you know. Even if it doesn't taste sweet, there's sugar in it. So it calls into question the whole politics of the food industry in general. And as I said, sugar is a very addictive substance. So they're using addictions to sort of hook people into, and we know why they're doing it, because there's so much of money there. But the question that the book raises is about what are the regulators doing? After all, the regulators are supposed to be protecting the interests of the public, the elected representatives or even the unelected ones who are permanently in power, bureaucrats, the food industry, or even the health system. What is the health policy in this country? I've not gone into detail about the new fat tax that they've introduced in Kerala, but I think it's probably a step in the right direction, though I don't know if it will be effective or not. You know, I think one needs to research that a little more, what is really effective. But of course, counter campaigns are effective, and counter campaigns have to do with challenging the kind of imagery that cola companies or any company which is selling a product that won't sell otherwise. I mean, if a lot of advertising is essentially about half-truths. It's not outright lies, it's about half-truths. It's about, and again, playing, as I said, when it comes to language, one of the problems with language, unfortunately, we have to use to communicate to each other is that it's never accurate. It's an approximation of reality that you extract and throw back at somebody and say, okay, I understand, but it's never there, it's never 100%. For example, I would say even, I would challenge the term human being, which we all use all the time. You know, it's an ambition, it's not a reality as far as I'm concerned. Humans, we are basically primates who at some stage have started doing things that, you know, evolved a language which says that we are human beings, we're different. But if you look at the material you are made of, you're not very different from the plant and the animal. And this is important to understand in the context of nutrition, in the context of health, in the context of what you blindly put into yourself all the time. And we're constantly ingesting things without even contrast. I mean, you start off as a baby trusting the family you're born with. Whatever they give you is the food, but over a period of time the trust goes from the mother to the father figure. You know, the father figures are everybody, you know, it could be the government, it could be the companies, it could be the advertising agencies. So if it is packaged well enough, we are today willing to put anything into our bodies. That is the most amazing thing. And if it's packaged well enough, of course, we have been inhaling polluted air, you know, and we are willing to tolerate the most ridiculous kind of visuals. I mean, talking about the many things, food is not only about what you put through your mouth, but what you ingest through all your senses, you know. Some atrocious visuals, or some atrocious music I am forced to hear every time I step out, you know, or even without stepping out. I'm saying that we're just invaded by things that are not good for us, you know, or at least we want to be able to make the choice. We want to ingest this or not. But the power of the advertising and the whole packaging industry is such, and packaging is done according to, I mentioned the point about the human and the animal and plant, because a lot of what we do is driven by culture, of course, and upbringing and tradition and education and so on, but a lot of it is also biochemistry. And language is like a dart that is thrown at a particular point of your brain to trigger off, you know, all these neurons running all over the place. Like the use of sensuality in advertising is rampant all over the place. It's constantly any product, you know. Coca-Cola, the car, everything is sold with a suggestive kind of, you know, picture there. You know, so it triggers off certain kind of very deep biological pathways in your body. You know. And with taste also, I mean, food is a very basic thing. It's what we survive on. Can't do without it. Unfortunately, I would prefer to be plugged into a socket and recharge my batteries and do away with food altogether. But we can't do that, unfortunately. And the thing is that these are all I'm drawing attention to how language merges with biology. And what happens inside our bodies becomes a subject of the entire world's politics. And everybody is trying to control your body. Your body is the real territory. When you talk about the nation, it's very interesting that the motherland, there's a body there of the mother. Even more than, along with land, there's also contestation of the body of human beings. Because human beings and the human body is the most valuable resource on this planet. Everything else is secondary. If you can control actual human beings, I don't have to worry about other things, and they'll get it for me. So first thing is to get you addicted. So I play with language, and as the book describes, it's not just about language per se in terms of, you know, talking to people and being persuasive or even advertising. A lot of it is accompanied by huge amounts of money and, if need be, muscle power. In a lot of Latin America, I mean, Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola and, you know, even pineapple companies, you know, they have been, American companies have been involved in organizing coups against elected governments. So there have been bloodbaths for companies trying to assert themselves in these kind of contexts to sell better. So it's not, language is not just about smooth talking or some nice advertising that you saw. But coming to advertising itself, they play upon, as I said, the most basic biological instincts that everybody has. But they also play on the trends that are current at a particular time, you know. I saw a Pepsi ad many years ago which said, "Be yourself, drink Pepsi." If I am myself, why would I be drinking Pepsi? You know, it's playing on this thing of being an individual. If I was truly individualistic, I would not drink Pepsi because everybody else is. So the whole idea of being an individual and asserting yourself is to not to do the things that the rest of the herd is doing. But it's very cleverly put, be yourself, drink Pepsi. So they're telling you to join millions of people in this mass addiction, but also claiming at the same time that you're being yourself. So they're making, of course, so the advertising industry is, I suppose there'll be more people talking about how the media is used and so on. But I would like to sort of end here by saying that the link between things like the cola industry and countries like India in particular is that in the West today, cola drinking is largely confined to the poor and the lower middle classes at best. In Latin America, it's rampant because Latin America is poor. Mexico is the highest per capita consumption of Coca-Cola, and I've seen people drinking, preferring to buy cola 2 liters, 4 liters, 5 liters. They've got all kinds of cans than water because water is more expensive. It's very straightforward, what. So as a poor person, I'm trying to get better value for money. If I'm going to buy 20 rupees worth of water and I get something similar quantity for the same amount of cola, so I think this is water plus sugar. So I'm, undernourished person. I want to get some energy. In India, what's happening is that it will go the same way, but today the middle classes and their children are addicted to this. And I want to clarify this about the middle class of India, is that for all the hype about India having a large middle class, actually it's a very tiny middle class. And plenty of studies that show by international standards, you virtually don't have a middle class. You have the poor, you have the lower middle class, and you have the super rich. That's all you have. You don't have a middle class. So actually the people drinking cola in this country, also their profiles are very similar to that of people in the West. They tend to be obese, prone to diabetes, they don't exercise, they're stressed in their workplace. It's a very similar profile. The so-called middle class of India is like the underdog of the West. Just some thoughts for people to reflect on and discuss further. I would like to now invite
just a point on what Satya said just now, and then, the middle class issue. It may be a small middle class, but colas are aspirational. So it's not about the fact that it's a small middle class. Everybody wants to be drink a cola, and that's how it's been sold. It's aspirational. There's a certain fun to it. It's happiness. It's all about the right words that are being used to sell a lifestyle. It's not just selling a drink. And I think that's what Marion Nestle brings out so clearly. I find this book fascinating, and I must congratulate Oxford University Press for publishing it. I think it is very important. It's very important because, and I think Sourish will agree with me on this, that very little is being written enough from a good academic and a rigorous perspective on how we as societies are changing our food cultures. And in some senses, we think that it just happens, but it doesn't. There's clearly an interest behind the change of that culture. And it's only after that culture has changed that we get up and we say, oh, I'm eating more of this. And how did this happen? And I think Marion Nestle does an amazing job, and there's another parallel book which I was reading, which actually looks at the history of how processed food, including colas, came in. And the whole way in which you deliberately first go out to create the language to say that home-cooked meals are not good. You demolish a science which existed, which has been documented again now in the US very carefully, which is home science or home economics as we used to call it, where people were actually taught, and there was a celebration about cooking at home. And of course, it also comes in the 70s, the time when the television is in everybody's home. It's also a time when feminism is taking root. And so it sort of plays, it's a tobacco industry ploy to tell women, oh, why are you going home and then cooking for your husband and children? You should be having a TV dinner. Home-cooked meals should be out and that. So it's not about everybody should cook together or that home-cooked meals are important and that how do you actually watch TV, cook meals, look after children and do that all by running a family, which means everybody does it. But you demolish the whole idea of home-cooked meals. And you bring in the whole idea of processed food. You bring in, I grew up at a time when everybody sort of had cake packets which had Betty Crocker on it. I don't know, you people are very young, I'm old, so I remember the Betty Crocker cake packages. And I never realized that this was a whole deliberate policy because there was somebody called Betty Dixon in the US who ran a very successful movement on home science. And there was a whole association of home science which was in the US. So the companies decided to create their own parallel Betty, except that this Betty was smart, fashionable, and she could whip up a cake without losing her lipstick. So it was sort of part of the imagery that got created, and in some senses we're all victims of it. And I think these things need to be written about, because if nothing else, we need to make deliberate choices. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a processed cake. I am saying you shouldn't have it, but I'm also saying it should be your choice, and it should be something which is not sublineal. It's not done to us, and then we get up one morning and say, oh, why am I drinking so much cola? I mean, the fact is, it is a lot of water and sugar, and there's nothing else to it. And at the end of the day, the language and it has to be a tribute in some senses to the advertising community, that how they have sold us literally water with some sugar and a little bit of, if you say, some oak leaves. I don't think they're there. I think it's just water and sugar and some strange chemicals in it. And created an addiction. But it's not an addiction which I don't know enough of. I mean, even when I went through a whole joint parliamentary committee on colas, which I have done, I don't know what's in the ingredients of the cola, so I cannot tell you whether it's addictive or not. But I can certainly tell you that they have created a fashion out of it. They've created an aspiration out of it. They've created a glamour out of it. And I think that's something that in some senses we've all been suckered. That some companies can create a glamour out of water and sugar. It means that we really have to be dumb. But they have dumbed us down, and we have been suckered. So I think it's important for us to understand that. And I think she does an amazing job in explaining how that has happened and how it was deliberate. It wasn't something that just happened, but it was deliberately done. And the second part, which where I have a lot of personal experience with, which when we tested the colas for pesticides, the Joint Parliamentary Committee was set up. JPC was set up under the chairmanship of Mr. Sharad Pawar, who interestingly had a Tropicana factory in Baramati. So, the whole thing was that here is a committee which is kind of should be on track. And it was the fourth JPC in the history of India. The first is on Harshad Mehta of Bofors. The second one was on some other stock scam. And then, so two on stock scams, one on Bofors, and the fourth on the cola. It was, and the way the terms of reference of the JPC were framed, it was an investigation on us, not on the colas. So the terms of reference were to prove that we were right and that we were not wrong about our whole thing. And I mean, it was fascinating to go through it. But what I found very fascinating when I was reading Marion Nestle's thing was so many parallels in the conversations that we had, because the whole conversation about, that this is good for you. And it's also good for the economy. Why is it good for the economy? Because it generates jobs. Why does it generate jobs? Because it has sugar interests tied up to it. Okay? So there's a huge, it's not, Baramati was not chosen just out of a hat. Baramati was chosen because it has the largest sugar barons there. So we were thrown all the time, we were told this very implicit message to us, अरे आप जो कर रही हैं उससे सारी sugar industry बंद हो जाएगी, अगर sugar के ऊपर attack होगा तो फिर क्या होगा? So this, it's a tobacco story once again. Same thing happened in tobacco. Big Tobacco always argued, you shut us down, you shut down all the farms. Shut down all the farms, where do those farmers go? The interest of the farmers becomes the interest of the tobacco. The interest of the sugar industry becomes the interest of the colas. And later on, after the JPC, of course, gave its report, it vindicated us, said that the cola companies needed to clean up their act. I mean, all that happened. Post that, I have found we also, our interests also have remained in food. And the other interest that we have is on junk food. And we've been doing a lot of work looking at junk food and in our lab, we tested salt, sugar, fat. And when we tested it, one of the things that came out very clearly is nobody has good labeling. That, one bottle of cola is equivalent to a day's quota of sugar. Now, I don't have a problem until you tell the child that if you drink this cola, the rest of the day, you're not going to get any more sugar. It's the same thing with Maggi. You have one packet of Maggi, 75% of your salt quota is over. So does the child get told that you have this packet of Maggi, then after that is boiled vegetables for you? But what Marion Nestle really brings out, and I think that's something all of us must read very carefully, is a regulatory failure on these companies. What happened in the US is happening here today. And that is something that we have to fight about. She explains so brilliantly how the issue of sugar and how these companies were, the products that they were manufacturing was bad for the American people, was known in the 70s. How government regulatory agencies, how the how the US Senate itself was talking about the fact that sugar was bad and was clear that people should not drink colas. So there was a clear connection between the fact that overuse of sugar and that almost 40% of America's use of sugar was coming out of colas. And therefore the link was don't drink colas. And yet how she explains that language was whittled down. That's where the use of language is fascinating. How the language was changed. How what was should not became maybe not. From maybe not became eat less. Became all sorts of new words were brought in. Like this fascinating word called sofa, which is something to do with I was reading it, I hadn't even known this word because in the junk food language I found a new terminology which I was supposed to accept. I was on a government committee, which is HFSS. Now, anyone knows what the HFSS means? High in salt, sugar, fat. It should just say junk. It should just say empty calories. It should say food which gives you empty calories. Even that is understandable. But the minute you bring in words like HFSS, you've alienated most of us. We don't understand it anymore. And that's what I found fascinating in her. She's gone through and explained to us how the regulatory science was weakened through the use of language. And how you absolutely undermine strong language by making sure you can use a strong action by using language which both misguides the consumer and also make sure that the piece of document on which you need to take action has already been weakened so much. And she explains how that is done through the funding of so many public interest groups, academics in the US, including lobbyists, of course. But what is worrying is the promotion of this through the funding to academic groups, through public interest groups, pretty much as we saw in the colas. When we came out with our study on cola, who was it that they put against us? Amir Khan in a white coat. I mean, what does Amir Khan know about labs? What does he know about nutrition? What does he know about pesticide? But it was Amir Khan and Shah Rukh Khan, if you remember, Sourish, who were put by the cola companies to contest us to say, what we have said is wrong, because now Amir Khan is telling you it is safe. Shah Rukh Khan is telling you it is safe to drink. So it is the use of these icons, it is the use of these people which, to my mind, needs to be stopped, because celebrity endorsement of any one of these products which is considered to be junk, bad for you, empty calories, is not allowed anywhere in the world. Only in the US and only in India. Okay? We're the two, maybe China as well. We're the three guinea pigs for these companies. So I think it's important for all of us, and I'm making a pitch for this book, but I think it's important for all of us to read it, because ultimately food is our business. Food is no company's business. Food is personal. Food is something that I find is the most personal thing in life, which means that it is important for us to know why we are eating it, and the history of food must be something that we must know much more than the current debates on history that we are having in this country.
Can I ask you
We would also like to ask questions.
after this?
In between, rather than in the end, because then
I think again the format is we get Sourish and then we
I'll just
open
ask
up
a
for
quick
questions.
question about the JPC.
I think
What
we'll do
happened?
that later. Let's get Sourish to talk, otherwise the whole thing will open up in questions. Sorry, Satya.
You know, it's very interesting that you raised the question of celebrities endorsing colas, because if you see one of the persons endorsing soda politics is Alice Walker.
Yes, I
You know, now it's interesting that we also have counter celebrities. You know, we need a culture of counter celebrities, and it's interesting when she opened her restaurant. It was a group of University of Berkeley radical students. So they were seen as a bunch of hippies, you know, doing a little bit, you know, maybe smoking pot on the side, you know, and doing something. But the restaurant became a celebrity restaurant. Then everyone started, you know, doing something similar. And Alice Walker today, of course, there are many more voices in support of her. But Alice Walker has become the face of this counter culture movement in food, and I think her voice rings across continents. So my submission is that in this whole battle of languages, you know, we need to create an alternative language. You know, we know what things are wrong, you know, but we now need to set things right. And I see a lot of the alternative language happening in establishment, in the establishment itself. You know, for instance, like a lot of practitioners. Like chefs and bartenders, you know, they're all talking about an alternative food culture, which is a very important thing, and which is what I think, as I'm a journalist, I can only speak about my tribe, you know. I think we should now, it's time to start writing and highlighting this alternative that is coming up, you know. I was very interesting last night, we were with a chef who runs a very successful bar in the city. And he was saying that how he has just done away with all sugar syrups. Now talking about, you know, we only talk about colas, but across the world, bars consume the highest amount of sugar. There's sugar in alcohol, there's sugar in the additives that go into the cocktails we drink. And those are intensely, I mean, they have as much, if not more sugar than colas. But because they're off the public radar, no one talks about them. So he was saying that, look, I found an alternative, you know, I've just done away with all these things, and we use honey water, for instance. Now, honey water is an old, you know, everyone knows, it's an old Ayurvedic thing, you know. They use gur shakkar, for instance, you know. So now, you know, we have to start telling people that look, there are alternatives. There is an alternative. Like for instance, okay, a lot of people are not drinking lassi, but there are packaged lassi. Again, the packaged lassi is packed with sugar. So any packaged product for longevity needs sugar and it needs salt. These are the two elements that give any packaged product its longevity. So I feel like what happened in Europe, that Carlo Petrini launched the slow food movement. Now, slow food has been part of our culture. We don't need to be told about slow food, but somewhere we lose touch with slow food. Now it's interesting though that because of Carlo Petrini, now people in India are talking about slow food, but I'm quite happy with it. It's an alternative language. Now people are talking about slow food. Suddenly people have discovered that one of the oldest citruses, one of the oldest oranges which is still surviving and talking about biodiversity, it's in Meghalaya.
Yes.
And people have been growing kiwis, for instance, in Arunachal Pradesh. And so increasingly what is happening that I think as people in the public space, we have to create a debate, a very strong debate first an information campaign. Okay, colas are bad, we all know that. But what do I think the whole movement should start from schools. Like Jamie Oliver, when he started talking about mothers cooking their meals for their children, it immediately became a national movement in India. In Britain. Now that sort of a national movement is what we need in India, led by people in the food business. Because the industry won't do it. As you have seen, politicians won't do it. It's so ironical that the MP from Baramati is made the chairman of the JPC, where Baramati is all about sugar and sugar politics. We have to have a very strong alternative. The alternative voices now have to have to come to the mainstream, and that only as journalists or people in the public space we can do. There are a lot of farmers groups across the country which are doing a lot of interesting things, and we also have the people like Patanjali, who this Ramdev, who are selling all sorts of things in the name of providing an alternative. I think it's time we investigated them. So are they providing the alternative that we need? I think what is good that something like a book like Marion Nestle, or what you did about colas sometime back, or I remember the CSE brought on the book on fast food. What are fast foods? Fast foods are the foods that people of India have eaten across centuries, and lived healthily and heartily. In fact, I remember interviewing Chandraman Prasad recently, and he was saying, he was talking about a study in Azamgarh district, where he said most Dalit families, most Dalit children, if they lived across after age 4, if they lived, they grew up to live till 85, 90, and their longevity the number of healthy and fruitful years they spent was much more than the Thakurs, who ostensibly were eating better and healthier, and they were having a lot of ghee, and all the best food, the best rice and everything. But why were these Dalits, why were the Dalits living longer? Because actually they were eating, low glycemic, bajra. They were eating bajra because that was the only thing that was growing in their part of the village, which was rain deficient, which was denied irrigation. And that bajra, otherwise in the Thakur's house, was being given to the cows. So what the cows ate, the Dalits were eating, and they were living longer and healthier. And now everyone is talking about millets, ragi and bajra, and all that become the new buzzwords. Sorghum has become an international fashion statement. And, everyone's talking about turmeric latte. I feel that the language of the alternative food culture has to be given a thrust forward. Little movements are starting at places. I'm very happy that today chefs are talking about that what they call zero-mile cuisine. Sort of, and it's come to India now. It's if people in Delhi, Bombay, and Bangalore, they start talking about this, it will become a national trend, and then people will start looking for what is. They'll again go back to the market to buy their vegetables. Because the biggest threat today is also that all our vegetables are coming packed. And you can just go to the shelf and pick up whatever vegetable, you can pick up any meal you want. Now. So all, the food industry is here and it is becoming bigger and bigger. The sugar and salt content of these are like killing. And no one even bothers to look at the back where all the nutritional information is written in microscopic language. We have to keep drumming the language of the alternative food culture. I think like what was Alice Waters at one time was a novelty. She was a freak. Today she's become the center stage of. She's like the last word for food. And generations of chefs now swear by her, follow her principles. Or have gone forward. With these words, I just say that we need to. The way Marion Nestle's book is very important is that it shows how the cola establishment, as I would say, it's like the military industrial power in a sense. They have glamorized. Even if you remember cricket. One of the biggest sponsors of cricket is Pepsi Cola. Was Pepsi again. And Coca-Cola entered the country by supporting Cricket World Cup. They have always tried to appropriate, images of athleticism, the images of physique, of virility, and they have always tried to spread the message that it's actually healthy. And it's great, you after a lot of a day's workout, you have a bottle of cola. What you're actually doing is negating all the workout that you've done. We have to build I think at a forum like this is very important that suddenly we're talking about the alternative language now. I think what is considered the language of subversion actually is the language of reason. So I think we need to go and just go at it. Thanks. That's my submission.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of issues have been thrown up by both what Sunita ji said and Sourish has said. Talking about the argument about economic growth and how cola companies provide jobs and the sugar industry and so on. In the last dying moments of the global tobacco industry before they were really banned all over the place, they did a study which was I think in the Czech Republic where they argued that because people smoke, they die young, because of which the government doesn't have to pay for Medicare.
Oh, they did that in
They did a whole study.
They did that for India also.
Yeah, there was one study in the Czech Republic in the late 90s sometime. So that's the kind of argument that, and you can say that for cola also, if everybody dies young, there will be more jobs, more space, your metro will not be as packed as it is these days. And the point that Sourish also made about traditional foods and how, like the example, the example that you gave, the fact is that unfortunately the poor in this country have not only been deprived of what they used to have, now they're being subjected to the aspirational model of what it means. The whole idea of happiness is packaged. The whole idea of what it means to be prosperous. Prosperity is linked to certain symbolic kind of images of having a car or wearing a certain kind of dress or looking a particular way. And this one, people are already rich. What we're really talking about when we talk about traditional foods and food systems is we're talking about people who are already very healthy and rich, being told, first being pushed off their lands, pushed off the forests they occupy, or deprived of the means to carry on living as they have lived for centuries. So they're pushed into the ranks of the urban or the rural poor, and first made malnourished to a point where they have nothing to eat. I mean, this is a land of malnourishment, really speaking, in terms of undernutrition. Not only in terms of bad nutrition, but also in terms of undernutrition. We have something like 40% of the adult population which is stunted, which is an indicator of undernutrition. Children, the figure is even higher. You have close to something like 3 million children who die of nutrition-related diseases every year. So it's the lack of access to any kind of food itself is a problem. But having said that, what Sourish has rightly pointed out is that all the traditional foods today, which kept the poor, so-called poor, monetarily poor, but ecologically rich, biologically rich people, they kept them healthy for a long time, also because they work. You see, one of the big ideas of prosperity, and particularly in this country more than anywhere else in the world, is that the idea of having arrived in life is to arrive at a point where you occupy a junction where other people have to pass by, from whom you can collect a rent. You know, you don't move physically. I mean, this whole debate over the Olympics, I've always felt that Olympics is not meant for people from this subcontinent, because the greatest people in the subcontinent believed in not moving. They sat under a tree without breathing for long periods of time. What I'm making is physical activity is not considered cool, you know. The poor do it, and as long as they had their traditional foods, they were healthy also. Now you deprive them of their traditional foods. Now Nestle is selling ragi, you know. So all these food of the poor has become now the health food of the rich, you know, all over the world. And then in place of that, you're pushing the food that the so-called rich used to eat earlier, which made them really unhealthy. You know, all the polished grain, polished sugar, you know, the cola, and so on and so forth. So I think that what we're really dealing with is multiple levels of issues. You know, the economic issues there, the issue of so much of money power behind the cola companies, the issue of regulators failing to do their job because they are in the pockets of the companies. Then there's the whole issue of perception about what it means to be the whole idea of being cool, you know, as cold as Pepsi Cola or as cold as Coca-Cola. The idea of prosperity, what it means to be glamorous, what it means to be fashionable, and advertising drives those images. So as Sourish also very rightly pointed out, you probably need a counterculture, where something else becomes cooler than Coca-Cola. So with this, I would like to open the floor for some questions. If people can introduce themselves and keep the questions short.
Thank you. I'm S.D. Saxena. I've been in the civil service and worked for telecom for a long time. So, see, I have two questions. One is that if it is that hopeless a situation, why fight it? If they have got so much money and if they have got everything, and if Shah Rukh Khan is advertising, then why fight it? Now, my perception is that Sunita Narain is as popular as Shah Rukh Khan. So why don't you advertise? I'm asking that question. Why don't you advertise and say that it is harmful? That is one question. The other question is, incidentally, I don't drink cola. And I'm a vegetarian. And a lot of people, perhaps Seva, maybe, I don't know, after you went to Sweden, perhaps you might have started eating non-vegetarian food, but a lot of Indians are vegetarian. Many of us have lived. Once I was traveling in a plane and I, by mistake, ate some non-vegetarian food. I had rashes on my body. So some of us have been brought up in that discipline. There are Jainis who don't eat after sunset, etc., etc. So we have very strange, very powerful food habits. Nobody can force anything into our mouth. And therefore, the cola, which there is so much of talk about cola, and I think that great debate which happened in the country, that's when we discovered that there is a very great star like Sunita Narain who went to the television and talked about it. But nobody talked about the contamination of water. Nobody has talked about the pesticides into the water. We talk about so much of cola because that gives us advertisement. That also gives us a lot of connectivity. We don't talk about the water pollution and pesticide. So why are we not talking about water pollution? Why are we only talking about cola? These are my two questions. Thank you.
Would you like to take up the challenge?
I was expecting this. I mean,
Nobody
firstly,
has answered that.
No, I'll answer
Yeah,
it.
but third one, JPC. You are talking about JPC. Which JPC has done any distinct action? Has 2G has convicted anybody? Has Harshad Mehta was convicted by you? Ask any JPC. It is all a muddle of politics where no decision comes out. Sorry. I'm saying it inside the basement, otherwise they will put me banned.
To answer your third question first, JPC in fact this time has had impact. So what were our demands to JPC, which will also answer your second question on why not contamination in food, in water, very important questions. So our demand to JPC was as follows. One, we said that we definitely felt that our study had shown that pesticides were there in the colas, and it was there because it was coming out of the groundwater that they were using, and they were not treating the groundwater, and there were no standards for pesticides in finished product of colas. So that was our first demand, that there should be standards on the finished product, not just colas, but across, of how much contamination is allowed. When it came to colas, we also argued that if you allow pesticides in food, you allow it as a necessary toxin. So there is a trade-off between nutrition and toxins. You argue that I will have a little bit of pesticides in my rice because I need the rice, or I will have it in my vegetables. And that is how all over the world you do pesticide science, you do food science by deciding on what is the acceptable daily intake. How much are you allowed of that poison, and you have it because you need nutrition. And our argument to JPC was, you cannot allow it in colas because they do not provide you nutrition. So if I have to have any pesticides, I must only have it in food, which is essential. Because the trade-off is between toxin and nutrition. And that's the science of food which is done across the world. So our demand to JPC was first, have finished products on colas, have it across processed food as far as toxin is concerned, decided based on nutrition. Our second demand to JPC was, this is not good enough. You also need to make sure that you regulate pesticide across all food that we eat. That we need a better regulatory framework for pesticides. You need to set the maximum residue limit, MRL. You need to decide that based on the ADI, and that government agencies have to be held responsible for the quantum of pesticide which is allowed or not allowed in our food. So you need to tighten your standard setting arrangements. And our third demand to JPC was that this is also coming because we have huge water contamination. And it's coming because we allow for these pesticides to get into water, and we have no standards for drinking water. Even today we have standards for bottled water, but we don't have standards for drinking water that comes into our homes. Now, on the basis of those, and I do feel very proud of the fact that there is an Indian democracy at the end of the day, and I do agree with you to the point that yes, I did have Shah Rukh Khan and Amir Khan on the other side, and we are not as popular, I will never say that, and we are not as glamorous, we are certainly not as sexy as them, but that is, I feel very happy about that, because at the end of the day, the JPC did give a verdict in our behalf, on our, to support us. It did say that you need finished products on colas, and we have got those finished products on colas. It has set up the Food Safety Standards Authority. It's a different matter that that authority, in my view, is now captured by the corporate interests, and therefore we need to fight it to make sure that it is at all effective, to make sure it's a policeman to police our health and not the health of the corporates. That's part of the battle that we all have to keep fighting. But we did get an FSSAI created. We did get the fact that the MRL, the pesticide regulation in India have been tightened. The reason I say this is because I have a defamation suit a day from the pesticide industry. So if I was making them happy, they wouldn't harass me. So I can only say to you, somewhere they are hurting Because they are certainly every day, I cannot tell you. I now have a system in which मैं लिफाफा नहीं खोलती, मैं उसको file कर देती हूँ. Because there is no point. But I have a criminal defamation against me, I have civil defamation against me. Last year, I had a policeman standing outside my door to arrest me. Why? Because a court in Valsad had sent a notice for non-bailable warrant that comes out, NBW, whatever they call it. Huh? And they said, you have to. The good thing in Delhi is that the police basically said, Madam, हम जानते हैं हम अच्छा काम करती हैं, हम arrest नहीं करना चाहते, मगर क्या करें warrant है. I don't even know on what basis that non-bailable warrant was issued against me. But the court in Valsad sent a notice. Okay? Every second day we have that. So I'm very clear, somewhere they are hurting. And that can only make me happy to say, somewhere, Sourish, the alternate message is out there. Somewhere all of us are saying, we do not want to eat pesticide-laden food. Somewhere that culture is growing. If we can make that culture grow more, and I totally agree with you, we cannot only say colas are bad, we have to also start saying, what is it we want? And the best thing in India today is that we still eat good. We still eat well. We still eat home-cooked meals. I had a team from Netflix the other day to make a film on eating at home. And I was thinking, wow, they're making films on this now.
No, I think that, thanks Sunita ji for your
No, I think very good
response.
question. Very
Yeah, no,
important.
I wanted to respond to one of the questions that the points you made about, why are we doing this if they're so powerful. I think if talking about the money power and the muscle power of these industries is just to show that they're really powerful, as she just pointed out. They can harass anybody all the time in the Latin American context. Luckily, we have not reached that stage. People get violent attacks on them, who are campaigning against the cola companies. But having said that, I would say that, as Sunita pointed out, in a democracy like India, you still have that space to challenge it. The Coca-Cola plant in Plachimada was shut down because a group of villagers said, sorry, without the panchayat's permission, you can't run a bottling plant here. You can't take away the groundwater from us. So they managed to shut it down. So it's not that things are not happening and people are responding. But in this context, I wanted to ask a question about pesticide content in food. How expensive or difficult is it to set up a lab to test food in a decentralized manner in cities in India? Just to ask a simple question.
See, two answers to this, Satya. One, it's not that it's very difficult, but as you know, technical capacity in India is now very weak. And so all the labs that have been set up, it's very difficult to run them because we just don't have technical, it's bizarre, but in India we don't have the technical capacity today. And then what happens is, to run the lab, you get into conflict of interest situations. The best model for labs is what was done in Europe. If you remember, there was this whole revolution in Europe where they set up something called science labs. Where in the public interest, you would set up a lab, government would set up a lab, anybody could go with a sample and get it tested. Today what happens is most of the labs are funded by, for doing research for corporates, okay? And I'll give you a classic example. When we test, we try and do it very carefully. So when we tested honey, pesticides, antibiotics and honey, we wanted to make sure that our tests were right. So we sent it to a very famous lab. We didn't send it in Delhi because we knew they'd find out it was from CSE, they'd give us a rigged report. Sent it in Chennai, sent it through another person's name. Nobody knew it was SGS, one of the top labs in Chennai we sent it to. We sent it through somebody else's name saying, koi connection to us nahi hona chahiye. We doctored the sample, one sample. We took a film of how we injected antibiotics in one of the samples. Another sample we sent was the sample. Sent it to them for testing. Both results came back, nothing found.
Yeah, but you know who owns this?
Yeah, we know who owns this. Yes. But that's a commercial lab. It's a lab available. So the point I'm making is there is that problem. And the other problem that is happening is the science is moving very fast. So all the pesticides that were used 10 years ago, you won't use them today. So you can keep testing, but it's not DDT, malathion that are a problem. It's now synthetic parathroids that are a problem. Now the difference between the two pesticides is they were long-lasting, available. These are short-lasting, very toxic. So you need to have new testing methods. So at some level, this is what we should all be collectively demanding. What is FSSAI doing? Once a year in the US, they take commercial food from the shelf, they test that food for everything, and they put it out in the public interest. Shouldn't our governments be doing this?
No, I guess, like you mentioned the example of Europe and how they did it there with public participation.
Yeah.
I think that model could work better here if people are willing to.
But for that, the main problem is like FSSAI. Even now, it's been 10 years, they just had the big celebration of 10 years of food safety act. They don't have a network of laboratories. They go to the same SCS and all, they go to these laboratories to get the testing done.
But they have 3 labs, and all 3 of them are understaffed and doing no work.
In fact,
So
their own labs are
very clear.
absolutely...
FSSAI, I mean, the last thing that they have done right now, which has really got my vote, is for 10 years we have been fighting for stricter standards for trans fats. Okay? And we did a test. After that, the standard setting started. File lay on, I will not name the minister's name, it lay on his table for a good 3 years. We kept pushing it, kept pushing it, kept pushing it. Finally, the standard got notified, and now the FSSAI has postponed the date from which it will get implemented. I mean, shouldn't our health matter? Shouldn't trans fat is so well known today as being one of the biggest issues, and we know that it's the poorest who eat the vanaspati. You and I will still eat refined and now cold pressed olive oil, though we don't know what's coming in the name of that olive oil, but that's a different matter. But still, we have moved to cold pressed oil, and it's vanaspati which is eaten by the poorest, and yet we have no interest in making sure that. And it is Kargil which produces vanaspati. You cannot even tell me some Indian manufacturer, bichara koi bana raha hai, usko kyun laat mara. It's Kargil. It's Adani. It's Wilmar. Why can't you make sure that we have tough standards? No, because it's not your and my health interest that FSSAI cares about. And I've said it to them, I've said it publicly, and I'm saying it here. It's the corporate interest. And we have to make sure. And the problem is we do not have enough food safety activists in India. We have to make sure, and that's why Sourish, we'd be really grateful. You as gourmet is a very powerful driver of good food. Okay? We need to use all our energies to get food safety, food culture on everyone's agenda.
That's true. That's a very important point. In fact, and the government, I think last year spent 250 crores only on self-publicity. I mean, that is enough to. You're talking about you're using public funds. That money, even half of it was spent. We could have had at least 25 good labs. I mean, that is the kind of priorities our government. Not this government, successive governments have had. I think nothing changes, frankly. And the point you made about food safety, writing, and activism. I think there is now time has come where we have to write more about it because it concerns everyone, especially our children. So, and I think that is the message to drive across.
Any questions?
Yeah, my name is Love Verma, and first of all I want to say that it was absolutely amazing session. Thank you so much for sharing your viewpoints. Sourish, I've heard you many times, and the first time I was hearing the 2 veterans here. So my question is with you, Sunita ma'am. I keep on, reading about you a lot in the news. Recently you came up with a report which says that there are carcinogenic materials present in bread, which created a lot of awareness among parents about their children. Sourish sir also pointed right that a large chunk of sugar goes in bars, and we should find a counterpart for this. Satya sir also said, the poor segment or the poor minority, they feel mentally satisfied with having these colas or junk food, or which they can relatively afford. And you also said that they work out, but the main focus is the kids. They don't. If you what I have observed living in a metropolitan, kids don't even go out for an hour to play here. They're so much burdened with their studies and everything. I don't think they even go out. Like it's only the weekends they'll go out for play, or maybe even less than an hour. So, as you said, you came up with a report on, or even they are the most ones who are addicted to colas and even eating at a McDonald's or a Subway. And we have even heard that the chicken used by these companies contain antibiotics. So, what is that you're coming up with something which can create awareness among parents, or like what things are not good for their kids? Like even these junk foods or something. I just want to check if you're
the problem in our country, I think, is unfortunately there are one or two or maybe three agencies which are all in the non-government sector which are doing this thing on a regular basis, and you must be facing severe fund constraints. I mean, it is frankly there's a consumer protection. I mean, there's a Department of Consumer Protection in the government of India. I've never seen them do anything which creates awareness about the levels of toxins in the food we eat. I mean, it should be the Department of Consumer Protection which should be taking up the whole study on, junk food. But they're not doing anything about it. And I'm saying this is the same government which has spent 253 crores last financial year on just publicizing itself. So, I mean, that's how our monies are spent.
But Suresh, I wouldn't be so, things are also changing. I find it amazing. So, 2 years ago, there was a High Court case that came up on junk food, and companies tried very hard to sort of derail the case. And it's very interesting for me how it's very difficult to know who's behind it. It's something like she writes. So every time it would be National Restaurant Association of India. And I'd say, अच्छे लोग होंगे restaurants में, तो मैं भी खाती हूँ, सब खाते हैं, अच्छे लोग होंगे. Turns out to be cola companies. Okay, so there are one or two of these. There's one food processing association, restaurant. They've sort of taken over these associations. One is Nestle run, one is Cola. So, in the room when I was there, I would think these associations are there. Actually, one was Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, and Nestle. Three major companies in the room. But it's interesting. There has been now a clear guideline against junk food in schools. So our position has been that you basically have a red light system. So you have red category food, and we did a lot of research. We actually put together a fair amount of information in the public domain to say, how would you categorize junk food? So what would be the quota of salt, sugar, fat, over which you would say the food is junk? How is it done across the world? So we came up with a category saying this is red category food, includes everything. So it doesn't sort of include, not targeted against the colas only, any food which has that quantity of salt, sugar, fat, eaten as snack, is something that we will classify as a red category food. Then you have something called the orange category, which is food which can be greened but is orange today. So, it's how you make the samosa. Do you make it with refined oil or good oil? Do you make it with trans fat? Do you put butter into it, or do you put aloo into it? I mean, there are things in which you could actually green some of the orange category food. And then there's the green category food, which is food that you should be promoting. We came up with this whole thing about how a canteen should have no red category, 20% orange category, 80% green category, and progressively you should try and green the orange as well. It was accepted. Today, if you go to many schools of Delhi, you actually have them voluntarily, as well as now, in fact, the Delhi government by law is supposed to ban all this, because the court has told the Delhi government they need to implement the guidelines. We should be asking our Delhi government, why aren't they implementing the guidelines? But there is now clear realization. So I don't feel so pessimistic. I feel there is a lot of now change in food culture. We can drive this, but it will get driven, in my sense, by two parts. One, through the through creating an alternate culture, and two, explaining the rationality in terms of why you would do it. And final point I just want to make is, you talked about exercising. I think Marion Nestle explains that so well. And I'm saying this because I've had such a tough battle. One of the people you will see with all the cola companies is a gentleman who works in the Sports Authority of India. Okay? And it's always been sports people who are the front for the cola companies. And it's always told to us that it's exercise that is the issue and not drinking colas which is the issue. And she explains so clearly how this strategy is completely flawed. In fact, the only man in India, and I think you should salute him, not only because he's the coach of our recent badminton player who won, but he's the only man as a sportsman who has publicly denounced endorsements for colas. And I think it's important for us to recognize this and talk about it. How come the others don't? How come Dhoni continues to endorse colas? Does he not know he's an icon for the young? Does he not know that he promotes a culture which he would not allow? I'm sure Dhoni cannot drink cola. He is not Jeeta bhi pita hai.
Just one more point I wanted to add to my question. So,
can we ask anybody else?
Actually, it is not sort of a question that I want to ask, but I just take the mic.
We have 3 mics, so we can give you one.
Thank you, sir. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. We're talking about this magical language. Let us talk about magical products. I'm talking about diet sodas and all. A month, 2 back, I was reading an interview of one of the actors who was saying that she's actually surviving on these diet drinks. And she says that she has this for like 7 or 8 drinks a day. Cans. So, is there any better version of cola? My question is this. Because I find this very funny when one of the person who is having diet cola says to another person having normal cola, how unhealthy of you. My second question is, sir, you talked about slow food, you talked about low mile something, and I'm talking about organic food. So we are losing the battle in that front because now these have ended up to be something that is for elite.
Yes.
These are not affordable. So these are not affordable for us. So it is limited to that society. So we are losing that front. We're losing in that front. My third question, ma'am, it is a yes or no. I would love if you give me a yes or no answer. Ma'am, exactly when we should stop celebrating Indra Nui? Thank you.
Yes, is doing a job.
Sir, it is Mukesh Ambani is doing a job, sir.
Yeah.
We all are doing a job. I am doing a very petty job of a journalist. Sorry.
So I'll answer the one about organic food. In our country, it's in a state of mess. There's frankly the laws of a country. If they're implemented, then every farmer in this country will have to take a break for 5 years. Commit suicide, and there'll be nothing left. Because the only way you can be certified to be organic, is when you follow a whole raft of rules which a poor peasant cannot do it. Our farmers don't have hundreds of acres of land. The average holding is like 1.5 to 2 acres, or less. But interestingly, what I saw in Punjab, and maybe farmers for their own families,
Yes.
they actually have 100% organic field. In fact, I was going and we were doing some, farm to fork sort of experiment, and so we were picking up, potatoes, and there was this farmer who said, no, don't pick up potatoes from there, they're not good. I said, what do you mean? This is, we give them to Pepsi, it's okay. He's the biggest supplier of potatoes for Victoria's, for the chips. So he then took us to the farm, the little yard that he had for his family, where he said it is absolutely contamination free, there's nothing. He actually created, there's like a barricade of a strip of land around that land, which completely, insulates it from any pesticides, any fertilizers, anything. So the farmers themselves are practicing healthy eating, but unfortunately, I'll tell you, for instance, talk about how dietary patterns have been changed because of government policies. We talk about green revolution. Now, for instance, a state like Punjab never traditionally has eaten anything but wheat or bajra. Today, they're eating the rice, they're growing rice, and they're just ruining their water table. A dry state in this country is producing rice. Nothing can be more ironical than that. In Haryana, traditionally people have been eating chana. Yeah, now they're eating rice and growing rice, and again playing around with the groundwater levels. And then also pumping poison. Because what are they doing to increase productivity? They're putting fertilizers and they're using all sorts of chemicals. So it's a vicious cycle. You don't know where to begin, really, frankly. So maybe the main, the main consumers of all this food at the end of the day are the urban population. So unless we have to begin somewhere. So I think we have to create awareness in this urban population. I mean, we can only take one baby step at a time. We cannot change everything at one go. There are hundreds of problems in this country, and there are people dealing with all sorts of problems. But I think there's a way towards solving. I think if you want to change in the food industry, in the way we eat, it has to change with the level of awareness. I think, and we have to make actually the alternative food, or what we call, not Nestle ragi, but the real ragi is sexy. We have to make that aspirational. And today, I think the so-called alternative food is becoming aspirational, at least in certain sections of society.
Diet sodas.
That sort of
I think you answered it so well yourself. What can I say? I thought you did it so brilliantly. I mean, drinking 10 cans of diet soda and telling somebody else, jo tum pee rahe ho unhealthy hai.
Well, she actually was putting it across as a fitness mantra.
But you're right, and I think that again, we faced it. In fact, they're coming up with a new ploy, which is not even something which has come up. So aspartame is now known to be really bad. Sorry. So diet soda basically means more caffeine and more aspartame, less sugar. That's the configuration change that happens. So you remove sugar, but you add aspartame or saccharin. First it was saccharin, now it's aspartame. And you add also more caffeine. So if you look at the diet soda caffeine label, you will find it more. Now, of course, because I like to irritate them, I actually got it capped as well. So now they can't go over 146 ppm, but at some point they were going much higher in terms of, so that's the configuration change that was happening. Caffeine gives you a kick, so easier, you don't need the sugar kick, you can get the caffeine kick. Now there's a new game happening, and because aspartame is now known to be really bad. It's a chemical substance, so now it's clear that diet is not very good because you're basically bunging in another chemical which is very bad. So now they are actually coming up, you've seen this latest one of the Zero, which has got stevia. Okay? And they're saying this is now the best healthy option because now it has some percentage of stevia in it. Okay? But it's basically a bad product. I mean, you can green it and clean it and gleam it and put Shah Rukh Khan on the cover of it, but it's still a bad product. I mean, the good thing now is, of course, that Amir Khan admits the fact that he was wrong in advertising them. So, I mean, that's a big change that has happened, that he's now a good food proponent rather than a bad food proponent, and he says that junk food is bad and all the rest. But still, I think there is nothing called a diet cola which is good for you.
It's a bit like electoral democracy. That if you don't like Coca-Cola, you can always drink Pepsi.
So, it's not so much of a question, but as you mentioned that I'm from a newspaper. So, I mean, as you've said, it's all about awareness. So I recently also attended a talk on the art and science of eating right. There was a nutritionist speaking there, but the audience was really like aged people, not like among 40 to 60-year-olds were there. The entire
40 to 60 is
I'm sorry. I think the youth was different. I'm sorry.
We understand your point.
Yeah. So even here, if we see, there is a very certain, as we call them, elite who are attending the talk, right? And advertising is big. I mean, my point is, how do we reach out to the masses? I mean, what is reaching out to the masses is only through advertisement and what they see.
But if I can just answer this, Garima, the big issue is, why do they reach out to the masses? Yes, they reach out through advertising.
Yes.
They also glamorize something. They make it aspirational. Yeah. It's the Marlboro Man phenomena. Okay? The Marlboro Man was seen as this really, macho man riding through the Wild West with his cigarette. Of course, the tragedy of it is the man died of lung cancer. Okay? But they created a cult around it. Now, why I am not so despondent, and that's why I think this is where the elite have created the problem. Let the elite solve the problem as well. And if they can do it quickly, it doesn't mean that India has to lose one generation. That's my only thing. Because at the end of the day, it's been all of us who have, not you, but my age group, who have actually, through our own aspirational, we have created colas as, the hip and the modern thing to do. Now, if I stop, if the elite stop, it goes down. Because at the end of the day, there's a fashion to it. There's an aspiration to it. The best thing I liked when we did our study on colas is when they stopped serving colas in airplanes. And I thought it was great because it's not about anything else, but you take the glamour out of it. Suddenly it becomes, somebody who takes a cola becomes, "Arey, cola pita hai." It's no longer something which is, "Mere dost aaye ghar aur maine pehle cheez di, maine cola diya." I go to villages now and they give me juice. Okay? So if the elite can create a bad habit through our use of it, can we not at least, don't we have the responsibility also of making sure we can change it? My only thing is, let's change it before we destroy a whole generation. Because in the US, you have destroyed two. Now you're beginning to say, today Michelle Obama's campaign against junk food is having an impact. And you're now beginning to see data in the US where they are now seeing declines in diabetes, decline in sugar use, obesity is marginally starting to go down, even amongst the poor and the black. Okay? Because the white had already gone out of drinking, this white women. In fact, she has this lovely phrase about how it was the white upper class women which stopped it first. So maybe as the cola giants used women or the tobacco giants used women and processed industry used women, maybe it's women who need to stop and lead it to make sure that no more is it sexy.
I think there are some points, Sunita's point about the US example is, I think, applicable to the urban populations in India, but we are also, as the recent report pointed out, the second most unequal country in the world, after Russia. And America, for all the evils it's been described to have, is actually a more equal country than we are. So there's a lot of this, in the sense that the power to decide is not as much with the Indian poor as or the American poor as in terms of trickling down from.
Why would you argue that Indian poor has as much power not to have a Maggie?
No, of course, here they can't afford to also.
No, they do. In fact, what is worrying today is the latest research which is showing now that, and this new research that has come out showing that how in slums of Delhi you're now beginning to see more and more diabetes because of the bad food habits that are coming. Because people go to homes and work and they see people having Maggie and they say this is aspirational. My child also wants Maggie. My child also wants colas. and the latest research which is showing hypertension growing now in rural India, showing bad food habits. In fact, if you take the latest NSSO study, it shows you how beverage, now the trouble with beverages, it's also got alcohol in it. So I'm not able to decipher how much of it is cola, how much of it is alcohol. But still, it's growing faster in rural than in urban. So you're beginning to see now the trouble is data on this is so weak because our data collection in India is a sham. So that is why when I had this big fight on salt, I'll give you an example. NIN, government agency, working on nutrition, fights on behalf of the junk food industries with us saying per capita Indian consumption of salt is very low. I'm saying, should you take per capita in India? Okay. And the fact is, salt, as much as sugar, is one of your biggest deciders on good health. UK, by dysregulating salt content in food, has proven it can bring down hypertension in a whole country. Shouldn't we be doing it? So, but this is tremendous, and I think that's where America and India come together so much. Our right to decide, our liberty, that like that Act said, you can't have government in this. Certainly not in terms of the Ministry of Food Processing.
One question.
Thank you, learned speakers, giving us a very interesting and informative talk in this field of healthy eating, food science, etc. My question is very simple. It was already asked by a friend of mine here. I am a teacher, a layman coming from Trivandrum. My question is, as already asked, why can't you start the campaign against these beverages, Pepsi, Coca, etc., Cola, etc., among school children? Because they are the children, they are the ones who have to be caught young. Yeah, and I have another doubt. The organizers have told they were expressing their doubt that they have approached the beverages people, but nobody was interested, nobody has responded. But I still doubt whether they have sent some spice here so that they can improve their marketing strategies.
If there are any spies in the audience, they're also welcome to ask questions.
Very good question, madam. I think your question on school children is so important, and I hope, I think that's where, in fact, in the US, the same companies, which I find so bizarre, they've agreed, Michelle Obama has this whole campaign against obesity. And these same American companies in the US have agreed to remove all vending machines in all schools across US as far as colas are concerned. So they've agreed there. But in India, they still continue to sell this in schools. And again, it's part of, in my view, it's part of a campaign. We have to keep educating people, explaining it to people. But what is most worrying is this latest study that Dr. Anup Mishra has done from his diabetes doctor in Delhi, who shows that it's actually mothers in homes who are having most colas and most junk food, and therefore they are creating a culture of that in homes. So I think we definitely need our demand to government, and I can only say we are not succeeding yet, but we are not giving up. What we have asked Government of India to do, the FSSAI, is we need labeling, nutrition labeling on all packages. So today in the entire Western world, when you pick up a packet of chips, you know what is the percentage of salt in that package of chips that you're having as a percentage of your daily quota. We don't have that in India. And the worst is you just pick up 5 packages and you will find the biggest gain. And that is something, language is something that he's talking about. Fascinating. Serving size. There is no standardized serving size. So Haldiram serving size is 1 muthi of bhujia. Okay? Which, you tell me who has 1 muthi of bhujia. Okay? A Lay's serving size is 4 chips. this is where the weakness of the food regulator is. But if you as journalists don't keep, I mean, how many times does any journalist ever even bother to worry about the FSSAI? We can't even pronounce their names half the time, okay? So those guys know there is no accountability on them. Who cares about them? But this is where our biggest issue is. They have to set serving sizes. We need food labels. We need to know what we are eating. We are not even saying here ban it. We're just saying give us the right to know. That is their job.
They're busy serving the cola company.
They're busy serving.
Sorry, any other questions?
Yes. Okay, on the language of sugar, which is what this was supposed to be about, and you said journalists should write. If a journalist writes, with all due respect to Sourish, anything against the food industry, he loses his job the next day, so we'll not get into that. My daughter writes a good food column for College Times, Huffington Post. There is nobody, and she's an Indian, and there's nobody in India who would even want a good food column in a mainstream newspaper.
It'll change.
I hope so. I tried writing long time ago, and that was the end of my writing on food. But on language of sugar, there are small restaurants in Lajpat Nagar which don't serve dessert anymore because Malik ke bete ko diabetes ho gayi. You ask for meetha, he gives you a handful of anar, dana. In the south, in Bangalore, which is a city which is full of bakeries and sweet shops, I live in Bangalore and in Delhi, there is a fairly reasonable chain now who's thrown desserts off his menu. Okay? A big biscuit manufacturer in Delhi is getting out of the business. He's sponsoring the complete cancer treatment in that Babar Lane center. Okay, because people are having this in their family. But if you're talking about, so that's one aspect of language, okay, where the seller, the manufacturer, the restaurant guy says, media ne kuch nahi karna, ad ne kuch nahi karna, let me do my little bit. Sourish writes for food and I follow his column very well. Would you consider putting a, viewer discretion advice every time you put a photograph of a nice, colorful, sweet dessert? You wouldn't, because you wouldn't get away with it. That's where I'm saying the language of sugar
But
needs to come from the media. We can't blame the.
I don't think we should take this to that extreme also. Just
no, it's
to
not
say.
extreme. We can't keep blaming government for everything. I write to the FSSAI and aspartame for the last 3 years I've been writing. I get all my replies in Hindi, which I understand, but it's not very clear. So then I had to file an RTI saying, how many replies did you give to Coke and Pepsi and other people in Hindi? And the answer was zilch. So that's again the language of sugar.
Interesting.
Small things. I don't know if you know about the language of colas on highways. Dhabas which keep the green colored bottles on top are from a particular religion. Dhabas which keep the orange bottles on top are from another particular religion. Did you know that? Notice it on the Delhi Hardwar Dehradun highway next time. So there are many languages of sugar, but the mainstream English media, and I think the most guilty of all the other people we'll be naming today, of not using the tools they have at their disposal to take forward this agenda. If a small restaurant owner in Lajpat Nagar can give you an hour, okay, and I'll take you to him if you want. Or if Nandini in Bangalore can take the dessert counter off. Which one? Nandini, you're from Bangalore, right? I'll take you there. I like to take young girls who call me aged. Okay. The Afghan restaurants. Lajpat Nagar too. There's a whole lane. None of them will serve a regular dessert.
Very interesting.
सब अनार देंगे and there'll be an old man smiling out there saying तुम्हारा देश का तो खाना खराब हो गया हम थोड़ा कुछ करेंगे. That naan is made of atta, that garani wala naan. So there are languages of sugar taking place on a small level, but our media is, I'm very sorry, the most guilty in this. Now I'll let you hit me.
No, I think, I just want to say, Vinesh, that it's a very good point, and I think we need to celebrate this. But it also, at the end of the day, I'm only distancing it to say that I don't want this, this conversation on colas and particularly junk food is about excess as well. It's about marketing as well. So, because I'm constantly confronted with this from the cola companies to say, oh, what about haldi, what about dosa? What about, aap jalebi khati hai na? Agar jalebi khati hai, to aap colas ko kyun gaali de rahi? Keep saying, it's about, if I had one cola in 1 month, one bottle, nobody is going to really bother about it. It's the fact that it's becoming part of the amount we have, it's the addiction that you talked about, it's the marketing that is happening, it's the aspiration. So there is that we need to attack, rather than, I'm sorry, but I have a sweet tooth and I do like desserts. I don't want him to remove all desserts from all menus.
Put a little thing at the bottom saying, viewer discretion advice.
Yeah. But all I'm saying is, it's not all desserts, it's how much you eat. It's about your ability to know what your daily diet has to be. The fight that she talks about in this book, and it is fascinating, it's a fight that is happening today. And in the US, it's happening in India, is the food pyramid fight. How much of your food pyramid should come from fat, from sugar? Less than 10% sugar. That is something that WHO says. That's something that others say. But it will not get done because the high sugar interests. And the high sugar interests don't come out of little bakeries or people who eat a little jalebi now and then. They come out of people who are organized, who can push their agenda.
But that's all I'm saying on the language thing. The transportation and storage of colas globally in developed countries is supposed to be done at less than 24 degrees centigrade. Here, in the height of summer at 50 degrees centigrade on the highway, bahar khade rehte hain. When I write to FSSAI about that, they say, yes, we have told the local police. I get one of those kind of replies. I've never seen a mainstream article on this subject, on the language of cola. Okay, so when he tells you about jalebi, tell him jalebi jo hai so hai. रंग गलत लग रहा है, आप अपने कोला को खुले ट्रक में क्यों खींच रहे हैं? But then again, the mainstream media cannot say that, they'll lose advertising revenue, and we know that, and you know that. I worked for the same newspapers in my time. Actually, that's why we have.
No, I think the point is that it calls for much more citizen activism. Actually, some of the examples that you gave of small restaurants taking the initiative.
In one
we need
week,
thousands of these.
Exactly. In 1 week, potassium bromate was out of bread.
Yes.
Okay? And please understand, for 5 years, FSSAI Council had cleared the notification that potassium bromate will not be used in bread because it's carcinogen. For 5 years, they sat on that notification. Their council had cleared it. They did not issue the notification.
I know that, but even today.
In 1 week, and it was not CSC, it was consumer pressure.
Yes.
The fact is, if people stop eating the bread saying isme cancer hai, even bread makers will have to agree to it. So
you know how they're getting around it, ma'am? They're importing these little pencil-sized sticks. Subway being the biggest sort of villain over here. Which travels at minus 17 degrees centigrade in refrigerated containers, which come all the way to wherever they have to come. And they don't come in as bread. They come in a slightly different harmonic code. Okay. And then they go to Subway where they have a nice little board saying freshly baked. So they've all gotten around it by importing these little frozen sticks, which become nice and smelly. Sorry.
No, I think this is. I think we'll wrap up now with these two questions because people need some nutrition after this.
Healthy nutrition, I'm guessing.
Healthy nutrition.
Hi, I'm Vidya. Hi, Sourish, Sunita Narain. Thank you so much for this lovely talk. I must compliment you, Sunita ma'am. I think your report, when it came out many years ago on Coca-Cola companies, really got us to sit up straight and take notice as to what we are drinking. Because for the first time we were told, look, you're actually drinking pesticides. And compliments to the media fraternity as well, because there was this movie that came out, on this whole issue, and amongst multiple issues, but this was the main highlight. Bipasha Basu was starring in that movie. And there have been numerous articles and numerous food writers and people like Marion, even Rujita Divekar, who has spoken about healthy eating, the concept of trans fat, and really educating people. And a lot of us are here because of this. So I don't really have a specific question, but more a comment and more an appeal to everybody in this room. Carry the message with you outside. Keep reading more. This whole controversy about Subway was actually raised as this blogger in the US, and people actually stopped eating Subway because of this. And I think that a lot of people in India also became aware because of the power of the internet. There was this whole thing that how do people in the villages get to know? Well, they are as much consumers of media as we are. If they are able to watch advertising, they are also on the internet. Surprisingly, the internet penetration in rural India is growing, And we need to use this to our advantage. You know, strategies like what you were mentioning, that how the government in UK is bringing down certain things. I want to read more articles about this. I want to have more people blogging about this. And I want everyone to carry the message outside, because at the end of the day, it's consumer awareness and activism that will get people and companies and governments to put their back up and do something for our own benefit. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Very good.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Sanju Malhotra. I've actually been living in Sweden for the last 20 years. I'm really happy to be here today. So just a few thoughts and reflections. One is that since I've been away, and of course India's economy has really become better, but so has more diabetes clinics opened in the country, and I think that shows for itself what's happening. On the other side, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what I see in Sweden. I mean, the price for cola is actually cheaper than bottled water. So there is that also still happening. Even though the awareness is high, it's extremely educated society, but cola still wins even in that society. So there's just a reflection there. There's something that the Swedes do, which I think is really interesting. They have this once a week where the parents allow the children to have a certain amount of sugar. So that is, I don't know if this is a cultural thing, if one can introduce something like that, because it's about culture. So they, through the week, they have to really control themselves, but it's on a Saturday where they go a little bit berserk. And they're allowed to eat as many cakes, and so that's kind of a control, but of course they also exercise and they get a lot of those opportunities. So I mean, that could be an idea, and I think it has to do with innovation and ideas for change. Maybe these cola companies need to come out with products that are, I mean, okay, maybe not the Good Life Coke or something else, but other alternative products that probably healthy, because there is a global trend on wellness. And I think that's a global thing that is happening. So there is something good that's happening around the world, and that has also come to India. So I think that's where, and maybe we should go back to the old ways of how we used to eat and live, and use that as our source for future health and yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I will hand it over to the organizers to say.
Thank you everyone for a lovely evening. It was a pleasant. It was extremely knowledgeable, and I think all of us enjoyed this session. I'll just give it to Liz here.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Sourish, Satya and Sunita for this wonderful interaction. I would also like to mention that ILF Samanvay, which happens, and I mean, which used to happen till last year only annually, like in November. We've opened this new format where every month we have this no tongues barred conversations, where this year's ILF Samanvay is revolving around the larger theme, languages, public action. So all these conversations are actually leading, these are threads leading to the large theme. So please like our Facebook, follow our Facebook page and on social media, so you get all updates about all these programs. I would like to emphasize that we are not really an event in time at all. We are not a lit fest, this is a thinking space, and all the programs, all the things that we put together are really well thought out, and it's towards a certain kind of cultural discourse, responsible cultural discourse that we are moving. So I invite all of you to be part of this journey. It's a quest. Thank you very much.